Hello, everyone, and welcome to Midnight Whispers. I know many of you listen to these stories to relax and slowly fall asleep. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from tonight. If you enjoy these stories, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Now, get comfortable, take a slow breath, and let's begin. I was around 10 years old at the time, still at that age where school felt like the center of the world and adults automatically knew better than you. I remember that morning clearly because it started like any other normal school day, but there was one small difference that later made everything feel strange in hindsight. My mom had mentioned before I left for school that she was thinking about taking me to the doctor that afternoon. I had been having problems with my eyes on and off. Nothing serious at the time, just something that needed checking again. She said she would see how things went and decide later. It didn't feel unusual or alarming. It was just one of those things parents say. And kids don't really think much about it. I went to school as normal. Lessons went by. I talked with my friends, did my work, and honestly forgot all about the possible doctor visit. By the time lunchtime came around, my mind was on food, chatter, and the noise of the dining hall. The dining hall was always loud, full of echoes, metal trays clattering, and teachers trying to keep some level of order. I was sitting there eating when one of the office staff walked over to me. She was a woman I had seen before around the school, so nothing about her presence felt strange or scary. She leaned down slightly and told me there was a taxi outside waiting for me and that I needed to go with her. I remember feeling a bit surprised but not alarmed. In my 10-year-old mind, it instantly made sense. My mom couldn't drive, so if she had decided to take me to the doctor, she would have booked a taxi. I didn't question it at all. Adults told you things and you trusted them, especially adults connected to school. I packed up my lunch, cleared my tray like I was supposed to, and picked up my bag. I followed the office woman toward the exit, already thinking about how the rest of my school day would be different. I wasn't nervous, I wasn't scared. If anything, I felt slightly important, like I was being collected early for something grown up. Just as we were about to leave, a thought suddenly hit me. I had left my jacket in my classroom. It was one of those moments where you stop walking because you know you'll regret it later if you don't go back. The weather was unpredictable, and I didn't want to walk home later without it. I told the office woman I had forgotten my jacket and ran back to my classroom as fast as I could. Classroom was quiet because everyone else was still in the dining hall. I grabbed my jacket from the back of my chair and rushed back, my heart beating fast from running, not from fear, just from not wanting to keep the taxi waiting. When I got back to the office area, ready to leave, the office woman looked at me and said that I was too late. She told me the taxi had already gone. I remember feeling a wave of confusion and panic. Gone? I thought taxis waited. I didn't understand why it would leave without me, but again, I was a child, and adults said things with confidence. I didn't argue or question it. I just stood there for a moment, feeling like I had messed something up badly. Then she told me to go back to class. As I walked back, my stomach was in knots. My thoughts immediately went to my mom. I was sure she would be angry or upset that I had missed the taxi. I kept replaying it in my head, thinking I should have just left without my jacket. I spent the rest of the school day distracted, barely listening in class, worrying about what would happen when the school finished. When the final bell rang, I walked toward the school gates with a heavy feeling in my chest. That's when I saw my mom standing there, waiting for me like she always did. The moment I saw her, all my fear came pouring out. I ran up to her and burst into tears, apologizing over and over for missing the taxi. I was crying so hard that my words came out jumbled. I told her I was sorry, that I hadn't meant to mess things up, that I went back for my jacket and the taxi had gone. She looked completely confused. She crouched down in front of me, trying to calm me, asking me what taxi I was talking about. When I finally managed to explain properly, her expression changed from confusion to something much more serious. She told me she had never ordered a taxi. She had never called the school. She had no idea what I was talking about. That was the moment everything shifted. The doctor's appointment never happened because it had never been properly booked. What stayed with us was the unsettling realization that someone, somewhere, had ordered a taxi to pick up a 10-year-old child from school, and no one knew who or why. The school tried to look into it, but nothing ever came of it. No one could say who ordered the taxi. No one could identify the driver. There were no clear records, no answers, and eventually, it was just left as an unresolved mystery. Life moved on, as it does, but the weight of that day never fully disappeared. As I grew older and thought back on it, as to mine, the situation became more frightening than it had ever felt at the time. As a child, I had trusted the process completely. I had trusted the adults, trusted the routine, trusted that everything made sense. It was only later, through adult eyes, that the danger became clear. My mom has told me more than once that she hates thinking about what could have happened if I hadn't forgotten my jacket. That small, ordinary mistake, something kids do all the time, might have saved my life. If I had walked straight out and gotten into that taxi, believing it was sent by her, no one would have questioned it. I would have been gone, and it might have taken hours before anyone realized something was wrong. What scares me most is how normal it all felt. There was no dramatic moment, no obvious warning sign, no fear at the time. It was just another school day, another adult instruction, another routine action. That's what makes it so unsettling. The danger wasn't loud or obvious. It was quiet, hidden behind assumptions and trust. Even now, thinking back, I can still picture the dining hall, the office woman's voice, the feeling of rushing back for my jacket. I can still feel the panic of thinking I had disappointed my mom. That emotional memory has stayed stronger than the fear itself. The story has become something my mom and I mention occasionally, usually with a shiver and a moment of silence afterward. There is always the same thought hanging in the air, the same unspoken question about how close things came to going very wrong. We never got answers, and maybe that's what makes it linger. It taught my mom, and later me, how vulnerable children are, how easily trust can be used against them, and how important it is to question things, even when they seem normal. It also taught us that sometimes the smallest choices, the ones that feel annoying or inconvenient in the moment, can change everything. I don't think about it every day, but when I do, it feels like looking at a different version of my life, one that almost happened. A life that could have gone in a completely different direction because of a taxi that should never have been there in the first place. I was 11 years old, still young enough to believe that home was the safest place in the world, the kind of place where nothing truly bad could happen, as long as the doors were locked and the lights were off. That night started quietly, almost forgettably, which somehow makes everything that followed feel even more disturbing when I look back on it now. My mom wasn't home, and I was alone in the house, something that didn't happen very often. She had gone out for a short while, and I remember her explaining it carefully, making sure I understood how to lock the doors and what not to do while she was gone. I nodded like I was confident and grown, even though being alone always made me a little uneasy. The house felt bigger when no one else was there. Every sound seemed louder, every shadow darker. I tried to distract myself the way kids do, watching TV, flipping channels, telling myself it was no big deal. Eventually, the tiredness caught up with me. I remember lying down and thinking I would just rest my eyes for a moment. I didn't plan to fall asleep, but I did, drifting off in that half-awake, half-dreaming way that only kids seem to manage so easily. I don't know how much time passed before I woke up, but it was sudden and sharp, like my body knew something was wrong before my mind caught up. At first, I thought I was still dreaming. There was a noise, heavy and jarring, coming from the front of the house. It didn't sound like the normal creaks or settling noises houses make at night. This was louder, more deliberate. Then it happened again. A hard, forceful sound like someone was throwing their weight against the front door. My heart started pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I lay there, frozen, listening. Another bang hit the door, followed by the unmistakable sound of someone trying to force it open. At 11 years old, your imagination doesn't need much help. My mind went straight to the worst possibilities, and fear wrapped around me so tightly it felt hard to breathe. I got out of bed as quietly as I could, my legs shaking beneath me. Every step felt too loud, even though I was barely moving. I crept closer to the hallway, straining to hear. The sounds were real. Someone was absolutely trying to get into the house. This wasn't a mistake, or someone knocking on the wrong door. This was violent and intentional. I remember feeling very small in that moment. The house that had felt familiar and safe just minutes earlier suddenly felt like a maze with no real place to hide. I thought about my mom and how long it might be before she came back. I didn't know what to do except one thing that had been drilled into me over and over. Call for help. I grabbed the phone with trembling hands and dialed 911. My fingers felt clumsy, like they didn't belong to me anymore. When the operator answered, I tried to speak calmly, but my voice shook no matter how hard I tried to control it. I told them someone was trying to break into my house. I told them I was alone. I remember the operator's voice staying steady and calm, telling me help was on the way, telling me to find a place to hide and stay on the line if I could. I looked around, my mind racing. My eyes landed on the pantry. It was small, cramped, and dark, but it was close, and it had a door. I ran to it and climbed inside, curling myself into the bottom shelf, pulling my knees to my chest. I tried to make myself as small as possible, like if I took up less space, I might somehow be less noticeable. From inside the pantry, everything sounded louder. I could still hear the front door being hit, the wood straining under the force. I pressed my hand over my mouth to keep myself from crying or making any noise. I remember thinking that I needed to be quiet, that being quiet was the most important thing in the world. Then the sounds changed. The banging at the front door stopped, and for a brief, terrifying moment, everything went silent. That silence felt worse than the noise. My mind filled it with images of the door finally giving way, of someone stepping inside, and of footsteps moving closer. A moment later, I heard movement near the pantry. My stomach dropped when I realized there was another door near where I was hiding. I could hear them trying that door too, rattling it, pushing against it. They were so close. Close enough that I felt like they could hear my breathing, even though I was barely daring to breathe at all. I remember squeezing my eyes shut, silently begging for the police to get there in time. I didn't know how much longer the doors would hold. I didn't know what would happen if they got inside. At 11 years old, your sense of control disappears completely in moments like that. You are just a child, hiding, hoping that adults you've never met will arrive before it's too late. Time felt strange then. Every second stretched out endlessly, while at the same time everything felt like it was happening too fast. I stayed frozen in that pantry, listening to the sounds, listening to the operator's voice through the phone, reminding me to stay hidden, telling me help was coming. And then, finally, there were new sounds, sirens in the distance. The noise outside changed again. The person trying to get in stopped. There was shouting, voices I didn't recognize but instantly trusted. The police had arrived. I don't remember leaving the pantry. I don't remember opening the door or standing up. I just remember being found. One of the officers picked me up, lifting me into his arms like I weighed nothing at all. I clung to him without thinking, wrapping my arms around his neck and holding on as tightly as I could. I was shaking so badly, my teeth were chattering. He didn't try to pull away. He didn't tell me to calm down or put me down. He just held me. I remember him speaking softly, telling me I was safe now, that everything was okay, that my mom was on her way. I buried my face into his shoulder and cried in a way I don't think I ever had before. When my mom arrived, I still wouldn't let go. Even when I saw her, even when I knew she was there, my body refused to release its grip. The officer stayed patient, staying close, making sure I felt safe enough before finally letting go. That moment, that kindness, stayed with me in a quiet but powerful way. After that night, nothing was ever quite the same. Life went on, as it always does, but something inside me had shifted. The world felt less predictable. Safety felt more fragile. Being alone no longer felt neutral or calm. It felt dangerous. As I grew older, people around me probably assumed I had moved on. Kids are resilient, they say. And in some ways, that's true. I went to school, I made friends, I laughed, I lived my life. But the fear stayed, tucked away just beneath the surface. I avoided being home alone whenever I could. If my mom had to go somewhere, I would ask to come with her or find an excuse to stay with a friend. Nights were the hardest. Falling asleep alone brought back memories of waking up to those sounds, of being trapped in fear before I even understood what was happening. Even as an adult, the effects followed me. I'm 27 now, and I still don't stay home alone very often. It's not something I talk about openly, because it feels hard to explain without sounding overly cautious or dramatic. But trauma doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it just quietly shapes your choices. The day I signed the lease for my first apartment should have been exciting. And it was, but it was also terrifying. The idea of being alone in my own space brought back feelings I hadn't felt so strongly in years. I knew I needed something to make it feel safer, something to remind me that I wasn't alone. That's the day I got my dog. It wasn't a long, drawn-out decision. It felt necessary, almost instinctive. Having another living being in the apartment made a difference I can't fully put into words. The sound of paws on the floor, the quiet presence, the feeling that someone else was there with me helped calm the part of my brain that never fully forgot that night. Even now, when things go bump in the night, my heart still races. I still double-check locks. I still feel that old fear sometimes, creeping in when the house is quiet. But I also know where it comes from, and I've learned to live with it rather than fight it. What happened to me at 11 years old shaped me in ways I didn't understand back then. It taught me how deeply fear can settle into your body, especially when you're young. It taught me that trauma doesn't always fade with time. Sometimes it just changes shape. I don't think about that night every day, but it's part of me. It's part of how I understand safety, trust, and vulnerability. And when I look back on it now, I don't think about how brave I was or how lucky I was, even though maybe I was both. I think about how terrifying it is to be a child facing something you can't control, and how important it is that someone showed up when I needed them most. That night took away some of my innocence, but it also showed me kindness in the middle of fear. And in a strange way, that balance is what I carry with me now. I was about 18 years old when this happened. Old enough to feel independent and capable, but still young enough to underestimate how quickly things can turn dangerous. That night started off completely normal, even fun. A friend of mine and I had gone to the movies together. It was one of those easy, forgettable evenings where nothing feels out of place. We laughed, talked about the film afterward, and when it ended, we decided to walk home instead of calling a cab. It wasn't that we couldn't afford it. We just didn't want to spend the money. The walk was a bit long, but it didn't seem like a big deal at the time. We were young, the night felt calm, and we told ourselves it would be fine. Looking back now, I realize how many decisions feel harmless in the moment simply because nothing bad has happened yet. I've always been a pretty vigilant person, especially when walking at night. Even as a teenager, I had learned to stay aware of my surroundings. I paid attention to sounds, movement, shadows, anything that felt even slightly off. That night was no different. We were walking and talking when I first noticed him. There was a guy behind us, walking in the same direction. He had his hood up, which immediately caught my attention. On its own, that doesn't mean much. People wear hoodies all the time. But something about him made me uneasy. Maybe it was the way he walked, or the fact that I couldn't see his face clearly. I can't fully explain it. It was just a feeling. The kind that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up. Every so often, I glanced over my shoulder to check where he was. At first, he was pretty far behind us. Far enough that I told myself I was probably being paranoid. I didn't say anything to my friend right away because I didn't want to scare her for no reason. I just kept watching. As we continued walking, I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. He was getting closer, not slowly, not in a normal, casual way. He was gaining ground much faster than made sense. We hadn't slowed down, and he hadn't started that close to us. Yet every time I looked back, the distance between us was smaller. My thoughts started racing. I tried to convince myself there was an innocent explanation. Maybe he was just walking fast. Maybe he lived nearby. Maybe I was overthinking it. Still, my body didn't relax. I felt tense, alert, ready for something to go wrong, even though I didn't know what. The last time I turned my head to look back changed everything. I caught him sprinting, not jogging, not walking quickly, sprinting straight toward us. And for a split second, my brain didn't even process what I was seeing. It felt unreal, like something out of a nightmare where your mind lags behind your fear. Then instinct took over. Pure panic shot through me, sharp and overwhelming. I shouted at my friend to run. I don't even remember the exact words I used. I just remember the urgency in my voice and the terror flooding my chest. I grabbed her arm, and we took off. That's when reality hit hard. She was wearing Birkenstock slip-on sandals, the kind that were really popular at the time. They were fine for walking around, fine for casual outings, but absolutely terrible for running. She struggled almost immediately, her steps uneven, her sandals threatening to slip off with every stride. I could feel her slowing down, panicking just as much as I was. I didn't let go. I couldn't. I held onto her and started dragging her along, half running, half pulling, my muscles burning, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. I didn't look back again. I was too afraid of what I might see. All I could think about was getting somewhere public, somewhere with lights and people. Ahead of us, I saw a gas station. It felt like a lifeline. We ran straight toward it. adrenaline pushing us forward in a way I didn't know was possible. When we reached the gas station, I ran up to the window and started banging on it desperately. My hands were shaking so badly that it was hard to even make a fist. I begged the clerk to let us inside. I didn't care how I sounded. I didn't care how it looked. I just needed help. The clerk looked at us, clearly startled, but then he shook his head. He told us he couldn't let us in because it was past a certain time at night. I remember feeling this crushing wave of disbelief and fear. We were right there, so close to safety, and yet still exposed. But then he said something that gave me a small sense of hope. He told us that if the guy came near us, he would call the cops. He picked up the phone and held it in his hand, making sure it was visible. We stood there, pressed close to the building, our backs against the wall, breathing hard. Every sound felt amplified. Every second felt stretched thin. Then I saw him again. He came down the hill and walked through the gas station area, staring at us the entire time. His eyes never left us. It wasn't a passing glance. It wasn't curiosity. It was intense, focused, deliberate. I could feel his gaze like a weight on my skin. I remember thinking that he looked disappointed, like someone who had been interrupted. I truly believe the only reason he didn't come closer was because of the gas station clerk. The clerk was a big guy, and the phone was clearly in his hand. That small barrier, that one visible sign of resistance, seemed to be enough to make the guy think twice. After what felt like forever, he finally walked away. The moment he was gone, everything I'd been holding in came crashing down. My legs felt weak. My chest felt tight. I started shaking uncontrollably. I completely broke down, sobbing in a way I couldn't stop or control. The thought that kept replaying in my mind was unbearable. He had been running at us while my back was turned. He had been closing the distance, silently, intentionally, while we were unaware. If I hadn't turned around that last time, if I hadn't noticed when I did, things could have gone very differently. That realization terrified me more than anything else. What if I hadn't looked back? What if I had brushed off the feeling and kept chatting, distracted? What if we had walked just a little slower? What if the gas station hadn't been there? Those questions haunted me long after that night. Even now, when I think about it, I can feel that same cold fear settle in my stomach. The idea that danger can move so fast that it can close in without warning is something that stays with you. It changes how you see the world, how you walk through it. I still walk with vigilance. I still check over my shoulder. I still trust my instincts, maybe even more than before. No, that night reinforced something deeply in me, something I wish wasn't necessary to learn so young. Sometimes your fear isn't paranoia. Sometimes it's your mind picking up on signals before you can fully understand them. What scares me most isn't just what happened. It's how close it came to being worse, how a single glance, a single decision, a single moment of awareness may have been the difference between a terrifying memory and something far more tragic. That night ended with us safe, shaken, and forever changed. And even though years have passed, the image of him sprinting toward us while I wasn't looking is something I don't think will ever fully leave me. Sorry to interrupt for just a moment. If you're new here, consider subscribing to Midnight Whispers for daily true horror stories that stay with you long after they're told, quietly unsettling and meant for the late hours. You can also turn on notifications so you're always here when a new story arrives and the night begins to stir again. Now, let's continue. This only happened earlier this year, which somehow makes it harder to process, because it still feels raw and unfinished. It isn't one of those distant stories from the past that time has softened around the edges. It's recent. It's close. It involves people I know, places I recognize, and routines that haven't changed, even though something terrible happened right in the middle of them. At work, we noticed that one of our colleagues had been off for a long time. At first, no one thought too much of it. People take time off for all kinds of reasons: illness, family issues, stress, personal stuff that isn't anyone else's business. But as the weeks passed, it became obvious that this wasn't normal for him. He wasn't someone who took long periods off work. He was reliable, consistent, the kind of person who always showed up. His absence felt noticeable in a quiet way, like a chair left empty for too long. When he eventually came back, there was a heaviness about him that hadn't been there before. He was physically present, but something had changed. He was quieter, more withdrawn. Conversations didn't flow the same way. There was a tension around him, a sadness that sat just beneath the surface. At first, people didn't ask questions. No one wanted to pry or make things worse. But over time, bits of the story came out. We found out that while he had been off work, one of his close friends had been murdered. Not an accident, not an illness. Murdered. The details were difficult to hear, even secondhand. His friend had been out with a group of people, doing something completely ordinary. They were at a pub watching a football match. The team they supported had won, and they were celebrating. Drinking, laughing, enjoying the moment like countless groups do every single week across the country. There was nothing unusual about it, nothing dangerous on the surface, just people watching football. But in the same pub, there was another group, supporters of the opposing team. When the match ended and the celebrations started, tensions rose. Words were exchanged. It started as an argument, the kind that happens far too often around football. Shouting, insults, posturing. That aggressive, tribal energy that seems to come out of people when it comes to teams, colors, and chants. Eventually, my colleague and his friends left the pub. They didn't stay to escalate things. They didn't go looking for trouble. They left, probably thinking that was the end of it. That the worst of it had been some shouting and bad vibes. That once they were outside and on their way, things would settle down. They were wrong. The group of men who had been arguing with them followed. They jumped his friend. Not a fair fight. Not a moment of heated chaos that got out of hand. A group attack. They beat him so badly that he was left critically injured. He was taken to hospital, where he fought for his life, but eventually he died from his injuries. Someone lost their life because of football, a game, a match on a screen. A group of grown men decided that another human being deserved to die because of which team he supported. When you hear something like that, it's hard to know how to react. There's shock, of course, disbelief, anger, but there's also a sickening familiarity to it, especially here in England, because this isn't the first time something like this has happened. And deep down, everyone knows it won't be the last. Football culture here can feel suffocating at times. On match days, entire areas become hostile. Riot vans line the streets. Hundreds of police are stationed at train stations and around stadiums. Horses, barriers, high-visibility jackets everywhere. You can feel the tension in the air before anything even happens. It's treated like a war zone because history has proven over and over again that it can turn into one. And the thing that makes it worse is that all of this is normalized. We accept that on certain days violence is expected. We accept that police resources will be drained. We accept that people will get hurt. We accept that families will worry about their loved ones getting home safely. No, all because of football. After hearing what happened to my colleague's friend, that acceptance feels unbearable. It's not just about disliking the sport. It's about what it brings out in some people. The way it becomes an excuse for hatred, aggression, and cruelty. The way it gives sad, angry men permission to unleash violence. and then hide behind loyalty to a team as if that somehow justifies it. These aren't passionate fans. These are people looking for an outlet. People who want a reason to fight, to dominate, to hurt someone. And football gives them a socially accepted framework to do it. Scarves, shirts, chants, rivalries. It all becomes fuel. What makes it even more disturbing is how preventable it all is. No one had to die that night. No one needed to be attacked. A disagreement over a match could have ended with people going their separate ways, maybe muttering insults under their breath, maybe feeling annoyed for a while. Instead, it escalated into murder. My colleague didn't just lose a friend, he lost a sense of safety. A sense that ordinary things are harmless. Going to the pub, watching a match, celebrating a win. Those things will never feel the same for him again. Grief like that doesn't stay contained. It spills into every part of your life. At work, we could see it in small ways. The way he stared off into space sometimes. The way his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. The way certain conversations would make him go quiet. It was clear that he was carrying something heavy, something that couldn't be left at the door when he came in. And what do you even say to someone in that situation? There are no words that make it better. Sorry for your loss. Feels empty when the loss was so violent and senseless. When someone was taken not by fate or illness, but by other people's rage. It also forces you to confront uncomfortable truths about the world you live in, about how fragile life is, about how quickly things can turn, about how some people value their ego, their team, their pride more than another person's existence. This is one of the main reasons I hate football, especially here. Not because of the game itself, but because of everything that surrounds it. The aggression, the entitlement. The idea that violence is just part of the culture. The shrugging acceptance that this is just how it is. It shouldn't be how it is. No one should die because of football. No one should have their family torn apart, their friends traumatized, their future erased because a group of men couldn't control themselves over a sport. Yet it keeps happening, again and again. Different names, different cities, same story. What makes it even harder to stomach is how quickly these stories fade from public attention. There's outrage for a short while. News articles, statements, maybe a few arrests. And then the cycle moves on. Another match, another rivalry, another weekend. But for the people left behind, it doesn't move on. For my colleague, that loss will be with him forever. Every birthday his friend won't celebrate. Every memory that now ends abruptly. Every moment where he remembers that his friend didn't just die, he was beaten to death in the street for something that never should have mattered. There's also a deep unfairness in how these things are framed. Sometimes it's brushed off as hooliganism, as if that word softens the reality, as if it's just rowdy behavior that went too far. But there is nothing trivial about a group of people killing someone. That's not mischief. That's violence. That's murder. And it leaves scars far beyond the immediate victims. It makes people afraid. Afraid to go out. Afraid to wear certain colors. Afraid to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Afraid to enjoy something harmless because someone else might decide it's worth killing over. It also creates anger. A deep, simmering anger at the systems that allow this to keep happening. At the culture that excuses it. At the idea that resources are constantly poured into controlling football-related violence instead of addressing why it exists in the first place. Riot vans and police lines are not solutions. They are damage control. They are an acknowledgement that we expect violence, not a sign that we are preventing it. What happened to my colleague's friend wasn't an unpredictable tragedy. It was the extreme end of a very familiar pattern. A pattern that society has tolerated for far too long. And that's what makes it so hard to accept. Because as angry and devastating as it is, it feels inevitable. Not in the sense that it should happen, but in the sense that no one seems willing to truly change the culture that allows it to. This won't be the last time someone dies over football. That fact alone is horrifying. And every time I hear about another incident, another fight, another stabbing, another death linked to a match, I think about my colleague, about the quiet way he came back to work, about the weight he carries, about how his life was altered forever because a group of men decided that a football rivalry was worth more than a human life. It's hard not to feel cynical, hard not to feel disgusted, hard not to feel exhausted by the repetition of it all. At the end of the day, football is a game, a bag of air being kicked around a pitch. It can be exciting, entertaining, meaningful to people in positive ways, but when it becomes an excuse for hatred and violence, when it costs lives, something is deeply wrong. And until that is truly acknowledged, until the culture surrounding it is confronted rather than accepted, stories like this will keep happening, quietly destroying lives, leaving grief and anger behind while the rest of the world moves on to the next match. This is a story that has been passed down in fragments, carried through generations with a weight that never really lifts. Even now, long after the war ended and the world moved on, it still feels close, like something that happened just yesterday rather than decades ago. It happened in my grandfather's village, a small place that barely registered on maps, the kind of village that existed quietly, shaped by routine, hard work, and family ties. Before the war reached it, life there was simple, in the way rural life often is. People knew each other, families were large, everyone depended on the land and on one another. My grandfather was one of 10 children. He had 9 siblings, and they grew up close, not just because they shared the same home, but because survival itself depended on cooperation. Their parents did what they could to provide, and like many families of that time and place, they lived modestly, but with a strong sense of belonging. It was a life built on familiarity and predictability, and that is what made what came next so devastating. When the war spread into their region, it brought fear long before it brought soldiers. Rumors traveled faster than armies. Stories of villages being burned, of people being executed, of entire communities disappearing overnight. Guerrilla fighters were active in the area, resisting occupation in whatever ways they could. They used the terrain they knew so well, hiding in forests, striking when they could, then vanishing again. The Nazis believed that villages like my grandfather's were sheltering these fighters, whether they actually were or not. When word reached the village that German forces were coming in retaliation for guerrilla attacks, panic set in. People knew what that usually meant. Retribution did not require proof. It did not require guilt. It only required suspicion. Many of the young men understood this immediately. They didn't wait to find out what would happen. They fled into the hills, the forests, anywhere they thought might give them a chance to survive. Leaving meant abandoning their homes, their families, and everything familiar. But staying could mean death. Not everyone could run. Some were too old, some were too young. Some stayed behind because they had nowhere to go, or because they believed, desperately, that if they did nothing wrong, nothing bad would happen to them. That belief would prove tragically misplaced. When the Nazis arrived, they moved quickly and brutally. There was no negotiation, no explanation. The men who were still in the village were rounded up and lined up against a wall. There was no trial, no questioning. They were simply shot, executed in front of their neighbors, their families, their children. Lives ended in seconds, erased as if they had never mattered. My grandfather was not among those men. He was still a boy at the time. His survival was not the result of chance alone, but of a decision his mother made under unimaginable pressure. When the soldiers began rounding up the villagers, his mother understood something terrible. She knew that the Nazis were not there to intimidate. They were there to destroy. She realized that if they stayed together as a family, there was a real possibility that all of her children would die. And so she made a choice no parent should ever have to make. She split her children in half. She took the youngest ones, including my grandfather, and hid them in the cellar beneath their house. It was dark, cramped, and terrifying, but it was hidden. She told them to stay quiet no matter what they heard, no matter how afraid they were. Then she took the other half of her children with her as the Nazis forced the villagers into the church. The church, normally a place of refuge and comfort, became a holding place for fear. The Nazis locked people inside, cramming families together, children clinging to parents, everyone unsure of what would happen next. My grandfather's mother didn't know if the church would become a mass grave. She didn't know if it would be set on fire. She only knew that spreading her children out gave them a chance. Not a guarantee, just a chance. While the villagers were trapped inside the church, the Nazis ransacked the village. They went from house to house, looting what they wanted, destroying what they didn't. Nearly every home was burned to the ground, including my grandfather's. In the cellar beneath that house, my grandfather and his siblings could hear it happening. They could hear boots on the floor above them. They could hear shouting, glass breaking, wood splintering. And then they could feel the heat. The house burned above their heads, flames consuming everything they had ever known. Smoke filled the cellar. The air grew thick and hard to breathe. They didn't know if the fire would reach them. They didn't know if the house would collapse. They were children, hidden underground, listening to their world being destroyed. Somehow, they survived. The fire did not reach them. The cellar held. When the destruction finally ended and the soldiers moved on, those children emerged to a village that barely existed anymore. Their home was gone. Their possessions were gone. Their sense of safety was gone. But they were alive. Those trapped in the church also survived that particular day, though many others in the village did not. Families were shattered. Parents lost children. Children lost parents. Entire bloodlines ended in a single afternoon. The survivors were left to mourn among ashes and ruins, surrounded by the silence that follows extreme violence. But the suffering did not end there. Sometime after the village was destroyed, the Nazis returned. This time they came not to burn, but to exploit. They forced the remaining young men and boys, including my grandfather, to work for them. They were made to build roads and fortifications, to carry materials, to labor under harsh conditions with little food and no choice. Refusal was not an option. Exhaustion, hunger, and fear became part of daily life. My grandfather was still growing, still a child in many ways, yet he was treated as expendable labor. He worked under the watch of armed soldiers, knowing that any mistake, any sign of weakness could have fatal consequences. The trauma of what he had already witnessed did not earn him mercy. It only made survival harder. Despite everything, he lived. Against overwhelming odds, my grandfather and the siblings who survived that day in the cellar made it through the war. Not unscathed, not unchanged, but alive. Many members of the extended family were not so fortunate. Their names became memories instead of futures. Their stories ended too soon. The village itself never truly recovered. Even if it was rebuilt physically, something essential was lost. The sense of continuity, the trust that tomorrow would resemble today, the belief that home was permanent. The war left scars that could not be seen from the outside. My grandfather carried them quietly. Like many survivors, he didn't talk about it much. Not because it didn't matter, but because it mattered too much. Trauma of that scale doesn't always come out in words. Sometimes it shows up in silences, in habits, in fears passed down without explanation. His mother's decision that day defined everything that followed. By splitting her children, she ensured that at least some of them would live. It was an act of love born out of terror, a calculation no one should ever have to make. There is no way to measure the strength it took to walk away from the half of her children, not knowing if she would ever see them again. That choice echoes through generations. It is the reason I am here, the reason my family exists as it does today. Survival, in this case, was not heroic or triumphant. It was desperate, painful, and incomplete. It came with loss that never fully healed. When people talk about war in abstract terms, about battles and strategies and victories, stories like this are what get lost. This is what war actually looks like. Villages erased, families torn apart, children hiding underground while their homes burn, mothers making impossible choices, boys forced into labor by the same people who murdered their neighbors. The fact that my grandfather survived does not make the story less tragic. It makes it more complicated. Survival is not the end of suffering. It is the beginning of a long process of living with what you have seen and what you have lost. Even now, generations later, the weight of that history remains. It lives in family stories, in the knowledge of how close everything came to ending. It serves as a reminder of how fragile ordinary life is, and how quickly cruelty can descend when power is wielded without restraint. The village may no longer exist in the way it once did, but its story does, and as long as it is remembered, the people who were killed there are not completely erased. They are more than victims of history. They were fathers, sons, brothers, neighbors. They lived. They mattered. And because one mother made an impossible choice in the face of unimaginable violence, some of them survived to carry that memory forward. A few years ago, my family's life changed forever in a way none of us could have imagined. And even now, it still feels unreal when I think about how close everything came to ending very differently. My brother was dating the love of his life. That's not something I say lightly or with exaggeration. Everyone who knew them could see it. The way they looked at each other, the way they spoke, the way they fit together so naturally, made it obvious that what they had was real and rare. They met in a way that feels almost romantic in hindsight, even though it was completely ordinary at the time. They both worked in the same restaurant. My brother played the piano there, providing live music in the evenings, and she worked as a waitress. Their paths crossed the way so many relationships do, through shared shifts, passing conversations, like small smiles exchanged during busy nights. What started as casual familiarity slowly turned into something deeper. Before long, they were inseparable. Things moved quickly, but not in a reckless way. It felt right. They supported each other, made plans, talked about the future, in that hopeful way people do when they genuinely believe they found their person. My brother was happier than I had ever seen him. There was a lightness to him, a calm confidence that comes from feeling loved and understood. She brought out the best in him, and he did the same for her. The only shadow hanging over their relationship was her ex. From the beginning, it was clear that he hadn't taken the breakup well. He was jealous, possessive, and unable to accept that the relationship was over. At first, and it seemed like the kind of thing that might fade with time, a bitter ex licking his wounds, struggling to move on. Unfortunately, it became clear that this wasn't just bitterness, it was obsession. Because they all worked in the same general area and kept regular schedules, he knew far too much about their routines. He knew when they worked. He knew which shifts they shared. He knew what time they usually left the restaurant. Everything was predictable, structured, routine. What felt safe and familiar to them became something he used to plan. At some point, something in his mind crossed a line. He decided that my brother needed to be punished for dating his ex, as if she were still his possession, as if her happiness was an insult to him, as if violence was a reasonable response to rejection. He planned it. That's the part that still makes my blood run cold. This wasn't a moment of blind rage or a drunken fight that spiraled out of control. He thought about it. He waited. He brought a weapon with him, a Stanley knife, something small, easily concealed, but unimaginably lethal in the wrong hands. He chose a time and a place where he knew my brother would be vulnerable. That night started like any other shift. Busy, loud, full of movement and noise, music, conversations, plates clinking, people coming and going. Nothing about it felt dangerous. My brother and his partner were doing their jobs, looking forward to finishing work and heading home together like they always did. When the shift ended, they began getting ready to leave, coats on, bags packed, that familiar end-of-day routine. Just before they walked out the door together, my brother stopped to speak to a colleague. It was nothing important, just a quick conversation, a moment that felt completely insignificant at the time. She stepped outside first. In that single moment, everything changed. The man who had been waiting was there. He didn't hesitate. He didn't speak. He didn't give any warning. As soon as she walked out the door, he attacked her. He slashed her throat and ran. She died right there, in front of the person she loved most in the world. That attack was never meant for her. It was meant for my brother. That truth is almost unbearable to think about. The randomness of it, the cruelty of it. The idea that if my brother hadn't paused for a few seconds to speak to a colleague, he would have walked out first. He would have been the one attacked. He would have been the one killed. Instead, she paid the price for loving him. My brother came outside to chaos, to screaming, to blood, to the worst moment of his life unfolding in front of him. There are no words that can truly capture what it means to witness something like that, to hold the person you love as they die knowing there is nothing you can do to save them. That image, that moment, will never leave him. In the aftermath, everything blurred together. Police, ambulances, questions, shock, grief so intense it felt like it might physically tear him apart. Our entire family was thrown into a nightmare we never saw coming. One phone call changed everything. One sentence that no one ever wants to hear. She was gone. And the reason she was gone was senseless, petty, driven by jealousy and entitlement. She hadn't done anything wrong. Neither had my brother. They had simply fallen in love. The man who did it was caught and eventually sentenced. He's in prison now, and he'll be there for a long time. That fact brings a small measure of justice, but it doesn't bring peace. It doesn't undo the damage. It doesn't bring her back. What my brother went through afterward is something I wouldn't wish on anyone. The guilt alone nearly destroyed him. Survivor's guilt mixed with grief is a brutal thing. He kept asking himself the same questions over and over. Why did I stop? Why did I let her walk out first? Why didn't I notice anything? Why wasn't it me? No amount of reassurance could erase those thoughts. Logically, he knows he isn't to blame. Emotionally, that's much harder to accept. He went through a lot of therapy. More than once, he found himself in very dark places. There were periods where we were genuinely afraid we might lose him too, just in a different way. Trauma like that doesn't just live in your memories. It settles into your body, your thoughts, your sleep. It changes how you see the world. He struggled with trust, with fear, with anger. Loud noises startled him. Crowded places made him anxious. He replayed that night endlessly in his mind, stuck in a loop of what-ifs and guilt. There were times when he barely seemed like the same person. As his sibling, watching him suffer was its own kind of torture. There was nothing I could do to fix it. No words that could make it better. All I could do was be there, over and over again, hoping that time and professional help would slowly pull him back from the edge. It took years, not months. Progress wasn't linear. Some days were better. Others felt like setbacks. But slowly, painfully, he started to come out the other side. Therapy helped. Support helped. Time helped, even though it never truly heals a wound like that. He will never be the person he was before that night, and that's something he's had to grieve as well. But he is still here. He is still fighting. And that, in itself, feels like a victory. And from my perspective, one of the most terrifying parts of all of this is how close I came to losing my little brother. I think about it more than I like to admit. How easily it could have been him. How one tiny, meaningless delay saved his life, but destroyed it in another way. I also think about everything he lost, not just his partner, but his sense of safety, his innocence, his belief that the world is fundamentally fair. He lost a future he had imagined, a life he was building. That kind of loss doesn't show up in obvious ways, but it shapes everything that comes after. The rage I feel toward the man who did this is hard to put into words. There are moments when I know, deep down, that if I ever came face to face with him, I'd probably ruin my own life trying to hurt him. That thought scares me because I know it's not who I am, but anger like that doesn't care about logic. He took something irreplaceable from my brother, from her family, from everyone who loved her. All because he couldn't handle rejection. Because he saw a woman as something he owned. Because he decided that if he couldn't have her, no one should. He's in prison now, and so far, he's staying there. That knowledge is the only thing that allows us to sleep at night. It doesn't bring closure, but it brings a sense of containment. A belief that he can't hurt anyone else the way he hurt her. Still, the fear lingers. The awareness of how fragile life is. How quickly it can be taken. How violence can erupt out of nowhere, driven by something as small and ugly as jealousy. What happened to my brother changed all of us. It made us more protective, more aware, more cautious. It stripped away any illusions we had about safety being guaranteed, or bad things only happening to other people. At the same time, it showed us resilience we didn't know we had. Watching my brother survive something so devastating and slowly rebuild himself has been heartbreaking and inspiring all at once. He carries her with him in everything he does. She isn't gone from his life, even though she's gone from the world. There are moments when I think about the version of reality, where my brother walked out first, where this story ends differently, where I'm mourning him instead. That thought alone is enough to make my chest tighten. We were lucky. Unbelievably, painfully lucky. But luck doesn't erase loss. It just changes who bears it. And all of it happened because of one deeply disturbed person who couldn't accept that love doesn't belong to anyone but the people who choose it. This happened at a place I lived a while back. And even now, long after the situation itself is over, the fear it planted in my head hasn't completely gone away. On the surface, it was just a robbery. No one was hurt. Nothing violent happened while we were there. But the way it happened, and what it implied, is what really got under my skin and stayed there. At the time, I was living in a basement suite with my younger brother. It was a quiet neighborhood, the kind of place people describe as safe without really thinking about it. Families parked cars that never moved much, neighbors who nodded at each other but mostly kept to themselves. Nothing about the area suggested danger. That sense of calm is probably part of what made everything that followed feel so unsettling. The layout of the house is important to understand why this stuck with me the way it did. The entire front of the house faced the sidewalk. Anyone walking by could see the front windows, the door, the porch, everything. It was open and exposed. But the sides and the back of the house were different. They were more hidden, surrounded by fences, trees, and shadows. If someone wanted to approach without being noticed, that's where they would go. Our basement suite had its own entrance at the back. That door wasn't visible from the street unless you deliberately went looking for it. It felt tucked away, private. At the time, I thought that was a good thing. In reality, it made it easier for someone to break in without being seen. Inside my bedroom, there was a small window. It wasn't large, just big enough to let in some light and a bit of air. The window sat low, close to ground level, because of the basement layout. The part that still makes my stomach turn is how close it was to my bed. If I was lying down, that window was maybe 5 feet away from my face. Close enough that if someone stood outside and looked in, they would be right there, practically in my personal space. The only way to know if anyone was in the basement suite was through that window. If the lights were on, you could tell someone was home. If someone was moving around, you might see a shadow. I never thought much about that window before. It was just there, ordinary, harmless. Then one day I was out, and I got a message that my place had been robbed. I remember reading it and feeling confused before I felt scared. Robbed? That didn't make sense. I asked questions immediately. What happened? When? How bad was it? My mind jumped to worst-case scenarios before I even fully understood what had occurred. The details came together slowly, and with each new piece of information, the situation became more disturbing. The robbers had broken into the basement suite through the back door. They kicked it open. That alone was unsettling. Imagining someone forcing their way into what was supposed to be our safe space. They went through our things, took what they wanted, and then didn't stop there. After robbing the basement suite, they made their way upstairs and robbed that part of the house too. What made it even stranger was the timing. They just happened to do all of this in a 30-minute window when no one was home. Not me, not my brother, not the people who lived upstairs. All of us were out at the same time. 30 minutes. That's it. In and out. At first, that might sound like coincidence. Bad luck. But the more I thought about it, the less that explanation made sense. For them to know that everyone would be gone, they had to be watching. There's no other way around it. They didn't just show up randomly and get lucky. They knew when we left. They knew our routines. They knew how long we were gone. They knew the house would be empty. That realization hit harder than the theft itself. Someone had been paying attention to us for days, maybe longer, watching when we came and went, watching patterns form, watching lights turn on and off, watching from somewhere we never noticed. That's when fear started to sink in properly. It wasn't the loss of property that scared me. Things can be replaced. Locks can be changed. Insurance can deal with the financial side of things. What terrified me was the idea of being watched without knowing it. When I went back to the suite afterward, everything felt wrong. The air felt heavier. The space didn't feel like home anymore. It felt exposed, like the walls had failed at their most basic job. Every room carried this sense of violation, like someone else's presence was still lingering there, even though they were long gone. Then my eyes went to the bedroom window. I stood there staring at it, and suddenly my imagination did something I couldn't stop. I pictured myself lying in bed at night, asleep, unaware. Outside, someone stands in the darkness. They press their face up to that window, 5 feet away from where I sleep, just watching. Not breaking in, not making noise, just watching. And that image hit me so hard, it made me feel sick. Because once you accept that they were monitoring our patterns, you also have to accept that they could have watched us while we were home. They could have stood outside that window on any night. They could have seen me sleeping. They could have seen my brother. They could have learned everything about us without ever stepping inside. The robbery itself only happened because we weren't there. But the watching could have happened at any time. That's the part that still gets to me. I started replaying nights in my head. Nights where I couldn't sleep. Nights where I woke up randomly and stared at the ceiling. Nights where I felt uneasy for no clear reason. I wondered how many times that feeling had been justified without me knowing it. How many times I had brushed off instinct because nothing obvious was happening. The idea that someone could be that close to you while you are at your most vulnerable, completely unaware, is deeply disturbing. Sleep is when you're defenseless. You trust that the space around you will protect you. Realizing that trust might have been misplaced shattered something inside me. After the robbery, I couldn't look at that window the same way again. During the day, it felt like an eye. At night, it felt like a threat. Every shadow outside made my heart race. Every sound felt amplified. A branch brushing against the house sounded like footsteps. A passing car made me freeze. My brother felt it too. Even though we didn't always talk about it, the tension was there. We double-checked locks obsessively. We avoided being home alone. We left lights on when we went out, hoping it would look occupied. We became hyper-aware of everything. The sense of safety we had before was gone. What really messes with your head is knowing how close it all came to being worse. If our timing had been slightly different, if one of us had come home early, if someone upstairs had stayed in, the outcome could have been very different. We could have walked in on them. They could have panicked. Violence could have followed. Or worse, they could have decided to break in while we were sleeping. That thought alone is enough to make my chest tighten even now. It also changes how you think about privacy. Before that, I assumed my home was my private space. Afterward, I realized how fragile that idea actually is. Walls and doors only work if people respect them. When someone doesn't, you're suddenly reminded how thin the barrier really is between safety and danger. Even now, in completely different places, I still think about windows more than I probably should. I notice their height. I notice what can be seen from outside. I notice blind spots and shadows. I don't sleep easily in rooms where windows are too close to the bed. It's not paranoia so much as awareness that was forced on me. The robbery itself was quick, almost efficient. They took what they wanted and left. No confrontation, no drama. But the psychological impact lasted far longer than the physical damage. The broken door was fixed quickly. The broken sense of safety was not. What makes it worse is not knowing who did it. Not knowing how long they watched us. Not knowing how close they got without us ever realizing. That lack of answers leaves your mind free to imagine things, and imagination can be far more frightening than facts. Sometimes I think about how easily this kind of thing could happen to anyone. A quiet neighborhood, a predictable routine, a hidden entrance, a small window. None of it feels dangerous until it suddenly is. People often talk about robberies as if they're only about loss, money, electronics, valuables. But the real loss is something harder to describe. It's the loss of ease, the loss of comfort, the loss of feeling unobserved. After that experience, being home no longer felt passive. It felt active, like something I had to defend rather than simply exist in. That's exhausting in a way you don't realize until it's taken from you. Even now, the image that scares me most has nothing to do with the robbery itself. It's that imagined moment of someone outside my bedroom window, face pressed close to the glass, watching me sleep. The thought that the danger wasn't loud or sudden, but quiet and patient. That's what stayed with me. Not the kicked-in door, not the stolen things, just the idea that safety can be violated long before anything is actually taken. If you're still here, then these stories didn't simply fade away. They settled in. Every story you heard tonight came from real moments, real people, and real situations where something felt off or nearly went wrong. If you want to keep exploring stories that linger in your thoughts long after the night grows quiet, consider subscribing to Midnight Whispers. There are more stories waiting in the dark, and not all of them let you leave in time.